video and I read through all their transcripts. I understood what they were doing, what they had to do, and what their interest was. So when they told me first of all, I could tell they hadn't read the whole book when they said that, because there is a section in there specifically for law enforcement, but I'm sure they didn't get to that part. But I wanted them to understand that there are different goals, and my goal had been to spend a lot more time getting to know him than the couple of days they had, because there's more to the story than just the details of the murders.
Yeah, for sure. And then something else I wanted to talk about with him for sure is that he's one of these guys. And this is different, maybe not than all other ones, but he likes to take credit. He's not one of those that will, when they talk about how many people he killed, he's not the type that would have killed 20 and then, only claimed 10. He wanted people to know it was him, right?
Yes and no. He wanted to take credit for the ones that he knew would be safe for him to take credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning there still could be some, or even just one, that he doesn't want to talk about because it would put him at a disadvantage. So, and that's all I want to say about that.
Understood. Well, he's one of those. He does not like to be off balance. He likes to be in control, and that's something you talk about too. Is that when at a young age, women made him feel off balance? Is that right?
Well, starting with his mother. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he felt she had betrayed him on several occasions. So that was kind of the first sense of this. And then as he started going into school and whatnot, teachers did it to him, and then girls. So he started creating what he called girl traps.
So did he still feel this way about his mother, or was it even a dislike for his mother so much as he just felt kind of hurt at various times?
No, it was anger. She betrayed him, he said. Betrayed him. Yep.
Did he get specifically into what she did, or was it just one of those blanket statements?
There were a number of incidents where he thought she had humiliated him, and he believed she shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have ever put her son on the spot. First of all, he's the oldest of 4 boys. So there's a certain thing that goes with that in terms of I need to be respected. I need to be given some authority. And he felt she had undermined him on several occasions to the point where he didn't think he could trust her. That to have that kind of relationship with your mother starts to work on you, because you start feeling distant from her and you start looking at other women in that mold. I don't mean to be psychoanalytic here, because I don't think it all comes back to the mother, but in Rader's case, the mother had a lot of influence because his father really wasn't around that much in his early years. He really had much more to do with his grandparents, and during those days, the grandmothers were women that he didn't have as much closeness with as with his grandfathers, from the two sides. So I think his sense of females began to form with some of these early humiliations and betrayals, and then the need for control would not allow somebody to put him off balance. When he got to school, he wasn't a good student, so now he's humiliated again by female teachers. So on and on and on. You can see how that builds into kind of a resentment and a distrust. I really, frankly, didn't know how well he was going to work with me, because whenever you take on a project of this nature, you have to consider your gender or your age or your credentials or anything that that person's going to have an attitude about. And so you have to consider what to do. I remember a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, went to, so he was Jewish, and he went to interview a serial killer who was racist and anti-Semitic. So he had to think about how am I going? So what am I going to do? So he loosened his tie. When he sat in a chair, he sat way squunched down, so there wouldn't be any sense of intimidation. You know, he really researched him well. He let him take the lead. So you always have to think about what kinds of things do you have to do to accommodate this person's potential distrust or anger or gamesmanship. You know, so I understood that I'm a female and that's going to play into this. What did help that was different for me from the original person who started the project was that I had academic credentials as well as many books to my credit that told him I had a certain sense of authority that he did end up respecting. And I will just add this because I have a number of friends who've interviewed serial killers, and often these killers are vulgar, demanding, calling at all hours, disrespectful, and really disruptive of their lives. And that never happened with Rader. If he called outside the parameters I had set, it was always for, I need to tell you this now, or I need to ask you this now for this reason. He was actually very respectful of me. I think he was more respectful of me than he was of the original person who started it.
Huh. Well, you know, back to the family dynamic, I was curious about something while you were talking. You know, that he is the oldest in that situation. His dad's not around that much. Did he feel kind of a sense of kind of unwanted responsibility where he was kind of put in a position that maybe he wasn't ready for or didn't want?
I don't think he did, because he really did like being the older brother, and he was very competitive with his brothers. You know, when they started collecting string, for example, you know, based on this world's largest ball of string that was there in Kansas, you know, he had to make sure he was the winner. But he didn't, I don't think he resented it. I think he liked that responsibility. What he resented is if somebody came along who might have undermined him in some way.
Yeah. Okay. I was curious because, you know, the situational thing. But something I also wanted to get into was the fact that people, I think because B.T.K., I guess, or Dennis Rader got away with it for so long that people think he didn't make mistakes, and that's not true. In fact, he didn't even necessarily get better as he went along this process. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of amusing in a morbid kind of way, the way he kind of whines that, you know, he just was so unlucky. He did make mistakes, and he acknowledges them in every single case. There's only one that he thought worked out perfectly, which was Nancy Fox, because he wasn't interrupted. She was his victim type in all the right ways. He could do what he wanted with her to a point, because he always had to get home. You know, he had a wife and kids at home. So mostly in each of these, he did make mistakes, and he acknowledges what those were. And he would experiment. He in some ways he got better because he experimented with the kinds of gloves he wanted, and which were working and which were not working. His entry into people's homes, because he broke into an awful lot of homes where he didn't kill anybody, but he did break in and take something. And he will talk about the fact, I mean, one of the big mysteries about Dennis Rader is the fact that he seemed to have stopped before he kind of picked up again years later. But the way he says it is he didn't really stop, he just didn't succeed. He did still break into people's homes, he did still stalk potential victims all during that time, but he didn't have the same opportunities to be away from home and to spend the kind of time he needed to really plan these things out and prepare for them. So he did make mistakes, but he always was trying to do things that would make sure he didn't make that mistake again. For example, when he entered the Otero home, which was his first victims, a family of 4, he claimed he had made, you know, good surveillance. I think he didn't, because he didn't know they had a dog. He didn't know that they had more than 2 kids. They had, in fact, 5 kids. He didn't know that Joseph Otero had been in an accident, was in fact home that day. So he wasn't that good at surveillance, like he likes to say. And so after that, he wanted to make sure when he spied on his potential victims, there would not be a male, coming into things. And yet the very second one, the brother of the woman, Catherine Bright, was there. So there he was, right in the situation he didn't want because he had made mistakes in his surveillance.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I really wanted to get across there is that, he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. Somehow he managed to get away with it for that time. But you touched on the gap between the killings. So basically what he's saying is that it wasn't a planned thing for him to take time off. It was just that it didn't work out the way he wanted it to,
well,
the times he had tried.
Right. Circumstances changed in his life. He had a job that took him out, places where, first of all, the early killings, he was going to courses at the university. So he could always say he was studying or he was taking a special session or, he had ways that were excuses made sense. Then he had a job that was taking him out of town, so he could say, I'm working out of town, even though he really wasn't. He volunteered with the Boy Scouts, so he could talk about doing things like that. But as his life circumstances changed, and he had a job close to home that was very regular, he didn't really have quite the opportunity to be away and to make plans the way he wanted to. I will say the one thing that really surprised me was how much stuff he had in these hidey holes that he calls hidey holes, because his house was small. I mean, like 900 square feet for a family of four. That is and all over the place. You have all these secret compartments to hide things that you've taken from people's homes and from victims. It's astonishing. And yet they never were discovered. None of his family ever found those hidey holes.
And you get into his family here. Talk a little bit about his relationship with his children, because by all accounts he was a good father. I mean, apart from obviously his other activities, but there are some accounts of him using like his son's vehicle while he was away and things of that make you scratch your head. Well,
I mean, he had a good relationship with his children. They were really blindsided. His brothers were completely blindsided by his arrest. His daughter is, in fact, finished writing her book on it, which will be out in January. I can't wait to read it because, she talks about what a great father he was. I mean, he was protective. He did a lot of things with her, like hiking and fishing, things like that. She just couldn't believe that this had happened, and it has completely wrecked her life in so many ways with PTSD and whatnot. But Rader's sense of it, from his side of things, is that he's a very loving father. I did ask him at one point about the car thing, where his son was in the Navy and had asked, Rader, the father, Dennis Rader, to keep his car and take it out here and there to run the engine, but basically just to store it there on his property. And so he used his son's car when he began doing what he called his cat and mouse expeditions, where he'd drop off, he'd go copy items for the police and put them into cereal boxes, which was the big joke, with these fashion dolls dressed as his victims. He would use his son's car quite often, and at one point that SUV ended up on a surveillance video at a Home Depot. The police kind of knew, it was blurry, but they kind of knew what they were looking for. So I asked Rader, did it ever occur to you how your son was, if you were ever arrested, how your son would feel about your using his car? And he was actually pretty upset with me for asking such an absurd question, because I was confronting his claim to love his son. And he said I was never going to get caught. I mean, that was his response. It wasn't, of course, I never thought of it. why would I think of it, essentially, because I was never going to get